Hello, my name is Louise McNeil and my presentation is called Pervasive Surveillance Social Controls During a Pandemic. Our entrenched history of surveillance has shaped the way we perceive and manage problems in the modern world, often disproportionately reinforcing and intensifying the impacts of surveillance and controls placed upon marginalised groups. The intensification of surveillance techniques often occurs in order to provide security for the established elites and protect commercial interests above the interests of marginalised groups. And we now live in a digitised world where each action, transaction and social media reaction creates a digital footprint to track our every move. As COVID sweeps the globe and the world tries to grapple with managing a novel virus, new methods of digital surveillance and controls are being implemented. We have witnessed an increase in state-led surveillance, and government controls have come starkly back into the conversation. During these times of difficulty and uncertainty, the drive towards increased levels of surveillance and social monitoring becomes pivotal in controlling the spread of the disease. Yet it also raises serious human rights questions. New digital tracking platforms record sensitive personal health data and intimate aspects of our lives, leading us to new levels of state-led mass surveillance. As governments strive to strike a balance between controls and freedom, surveillance and privacy rights, economic security and health, the handling of the pandemic has highlighted a struggle where economic interests are pitted against the health of nations. Questions have been raised about the new levels of state controls and the disproportionate impact on society. Nations across the world have altered social structures, legislations, immigration or travel rules to protect against the virus, and surveillance applications to track and trace individuals have been quickly developed and rolled out around the world. In Ireland, as with many countries, there has been a state-led drive to persuade the public to adopt the new technologies in order to protect themselves and their loved ones. However, the hasty introduction of new global tracing applications was problematic. Some had glitches and issues, and others were highly criticised for their invasive impact. There has also been significant concerns raised about the use of centralised government databases, which store all the track and trace data, raising questions about the future use of that data. The UK centralised track and trace application was designed to store information for 20 years if the user had tested positive, or 5 years if the user was a close contact. This received significant criticism as it was unclear why the information would be required for such a long time. Between issues with the system, user distrust and negative criticisms regarding privacy rights, the UK eventually moved towards a decentralised system hosted by a collaboration between Apple and Google. Due to the volume of sensitive data that surveillance tracking applications need to obtain, advocates and privacy researchers have recommended decentralised track and trace systems to enable individuals to be socially responsible during the pandemic while attempting to protect their privacy from government overreach. While some states have tried to reassure the public that their privacy will be maintained, others have taken a more mandatory approach to the use of tracking devices. After the discovery of the virus, China's unrelenting surveillance networks once again drew attention as telecommunications providers sent the government lists of individuals travelling across restricted regions, which was identified through their personal phone GPS. China has embarked on a new form of social control through an application called the Alipay Health Code. All citizens are required to download the tracking system, and local police can routinely stop citizens to check they have it. The application determines an individual's risk level and provides them with a coloured QR code, which is presented for access to public space and public transport services. This raises concerns regarding social sorting and social controls and the potential for the consequences to reach far beyond managing populations during the pandemic. The general migration of over state-led forms of surveillance to silent, pervasive, covert digital surveillance significantly alters the power dynamics, resulting in a more effective social control mechanism. Governments around the world are struggling precariously in their attempts to balance the negative consequences of managing the virus. There are serious repercussions for mental health services resulting from increased levels of demand as people are suffering from isolation and fear. In addition, governments are attempting to mitigate the significant economic impacts, which have undoubtedly afflicted the less affluent areas more dramatically and might further increase the poverty and inequality gaps. Those earning higher incomes tend to have had the opportunity to work from home, suffering less financial consequences, while lower income households have tended to be on the front line of essential retail and services. As a result, they've been subjected to higher levels of risk and greater financial impacts with job losses and furloughing. There have also been shifts in power, with many world leaders passing emergency legislation that significantly alters the power dynamics of the state. This is particularly evident in Hungary, where emergency legislation was passed allowing the government and the Prime Minister to rule by indefinite decree. Other countries have also taken steps in shifting the balance of power. The British government have been accused of using the pandemic to enact emergency legislation and erode parliamentary sovereignty, make a power grab, flout the rule of law, and impair human rights. Israel has also taken drastic surveillance steps as they tapped into their security agencies' covert collection of phone records. Chile's president enacted new powers under a state of emergency, which allowed the military to enforce curfews in a bid to contain COVID. And Bolivia's now former president was accused of trying to cling on to power by using the pandemic as a reason to postpone the election for a second time. The pandemic has facilitated emergency actions and allowed leaders to move towards a power grab and increase levels of mass surveillance with little or no resistance. We have yet to see the full effect of the change in power dynamics across the world as the pandemic continues to surge, as executive powers and mass surveillance continues to be utilised in the name of control and safety. The challenges of COVID has resulted in unprecedented levels of surveillance and social controls, as Human Rights Watch have raised concerns over abuses of power as countries around the world violate rights relating to free speech and peaceful assembly. In addition, the potential for harvesting data for commercial gain, misuse and abuse remains high, and as a result, organisations like Privacy International are acting as watchdogs to protect privacy rights in the aftermath of the pandemic. However, it would be naive to suggest that alterations in power dynamics and increased levels of surveillance are not required to control the pandemic. It's clear from episodes in history that at times of plague, drastic actions and increased levels of surveillance have been needed to contain the spread. In order to mitigate a novel virus that has yet to be fully understood, governments need to move towards social controls to contain populations and manage dissent. The surveillance capacity of our socially networked lives has proven beneficial in terms of understanding and tracking the pandemic, with evidence that COVID hotspots follow patterns replicated in Facebook's social networks, providing some predictability for outbreaks. Mobile phones enable a unique opportunity to track, monitor, and provide evidence to develop prediction-based models on social group interactions. It is currently within our interests as a society to utilise this surveillance data to our benefit, informing effective models for communicable diseases. Technological advancements in surveillance technologies have undeniably provided us with a framework that can alleviate the spread of disease. Digital mass surveillance systems supported by high-functioning and high-volume surveillance technologies have the ability to forensically identify individuals. However, in this digital age, it's also important that these changes in levels of surveillance are specifically utilised purely for the purpose of mitigating the pandemic. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I'm available for questions.